Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Fast Talk. I'm Chris Case. This is your source for the science of endurance performance. And today we have, of course, Coach Trevor Connor and longtime contributor and former guest many times, Julie Young. Welcome back to Fast Talk, Julie.
Thanks for having me back. It was great to have the opportunity to join you guys again.
Yeah, Julie, it's been too long. Been excited to have this chance to talk with you.
Me too.
Listeners, Chris and I are excited about an upcoming milestone here at Fast Talk. On January 27th, we will release our 200th Fast Talk episode. We're proud to have brought you 200 episodes featuring the world's most respected and influential experts in training, physiology, sports nutrition, bike fit, recovery, sports medicine, plus some bad jokes about Canada. So, we have a very special 200th episode planned for you, and we'd like you to be a part of it. Record your best questions on your smartphone recorder app and email them to info@fasttalklabs.com by January 1st. Any topic is fair game, but we are especially excited to hear your questions about the future of endurance sports. So, again, record your questions and send them to info@fasttalklabs.com.
Today we're going to dive into some listener questions on things like training plans, the stress of racing, body image. So we're going to run the gamut. Why don't we just head straight into the questions? We've got a good one here. It comes from Devin Knickerbocker, who's a longtime listener. He has contributed this question on our forum. I'll read it now. He writes, I just read the Husheng Amiri article, How to Develop a Yearly Training Plan, and I noticed that he uses a spreadsheet. I've also been using a spreadsheet, but what resources and formats do you guys use to design and manage an ATP? Are there any apps or programs that facilitate this better than Microsoft Excel? I've tried to use Training Peaks, but I've found that it is difficult to get the right level of view. For example, their ATP builder is a combination of too high level. For example, you can't look at planned progression of weightlifting, core, flexibility, skills and training all next to each other. And it's also somehow too granular, he says. For example, you have to pick the amount of TSS that you plan to be doing 7 months in the future, which feels absurd. Training Peaks is great for planning a week and or designing individual workouts, but for the ATP functionality, I just don't feel that it fits the bill. Any other ideas? Julie, let's start with you. How do you build out your annual training plans for the athletes you work with?
Well, it's funny, when I read this question, I was actually trying to research some different tools for myself. I agree, like for me, the Training Peaks annual training plan is too cumbersome. And I also just want to have like windows that I can go back and forth on and not have to lose a window and then have to reference another window. So just kind of seeing them side by side, which is generally I find the Training Peaks annual training plan, like I said, just too cumbersome. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find any other tools. So I do resort to an Excel sheet, and I, just put different color coding in that Excel sheet, which helps me visually. The other thing I use, which I know doesn't help because it's not integrated, but I do use Bridge Athletic for my strength training programs. And I love that platform because it's dedicated to strength work. I think it really helps in the development of the strength conditioning.
So I want to point out here that Devin is commenting on this article that has the image being used in the article is a Excel spreadsheet. It has a lot of color coding. It was built by Husheng. But if anybody has ever seen what Trevor produces for an athlete, it looks very similar to this, and there's a reason why that is. Correct, Trevor?
Well, Husheng was my coach, and he was the one who, when I started my coaching career, it was under Husheng. So I actually started with his template as my template. Mm-hmm. And me being me, I took an already complicated template and just made it almost unreadable.
Yes, but it's still built in Excel.
It is still built in Excel. So, my response to this is I see it as you have a choice. And I have, like Julie, done the research into this and ultimately made that conscious choice of, on the one hand, you have something like Training Peaks. And look, there yearly training plan builder is based on a lot of science. I mean, this goes right back to Joe Friel's Cyclist Training Bible and his concepts for building a yearly training plan that was basically built into Training Peaks. And if you like their philosophy, if you agree with their approach, you basically have a somewhat simple template that makes building a training plan a lot easier. So I think if you say, I'm inexperienced with this and I need some help, something that's going to guide me and make this simpler for me, something like what they have in Training Peaks or some of these other tools is great. But you are sacrificing, as the question implied, having it do exactly what you want it to do. And if you are like Julie, I'm getting the sense you're like this, if you're certainly like me, and I'll say I'm ridiculously anal retentive and want to have complete control over every little part of it, then you got to do something custom, and then I think you're building it in an Excel sheet.
Mm-hmm. And you're also saying that you haven't really found anything that is in between those two worlds, what Training Peaks offers and what you want to do. There's nothing out there yet.
You know, for me personally, because I have my own way of coaching and my own systems, I mean, if you look at my template, if you look at Hu Shang's template and you look at Training Peaks templates, there's a lot of commonality.
Sure.
There is standard ways that have been developed for doing this. So you're going to see those similarities. But I have my own system. I have my own way that I like to coach. And there is no tool out there that allows me to do it exactly the way I want. So I haven't tried. I just stick with Excel and go, yes, Excel's a little clunky, but I get to build the training plan I want to build.
Exactly that. I guess just feeling like more control. And I mean, again, like, I don't know, for me, in a lot of ways, it's simpler. And it's just, just able to put in what's important for me and not kind of these extracurricular things.
It seems like once you have that template built in Excel or whatever tool you decide to use, then it gets much simpler. It's time consuming, though, to get the Excel spreadsheet or the template of your choice to that point. It took you years, did it not, Trevor, to develop what you have now?
Yeah, I completely started with Hu Shang's template.
You stole it.
Stole it completely.
Yes.
Well, I shouldn't say I stole it because he allowed me to use it.
Yeah, right. There you go. With permission.
With permission. And then as I got into my coaching style, I was like, well, I want to change this and I want to change that. And then it just became a system for me. At the beginning of every season, I would spend time in October to take my template and go, what do I want to change? What do I want to add? What have I learned this year that I want to incorporate into this? So every year, my template would change. And that has been ongoing for how many years now? So it has evolved a lot. And
more than a decade?
Oh, well, more than a decade.
Yeah.
And one of the things I like about Excel is I've worked a whole lot of formulas into it. So that does simplify some things where I can, I don't want to go into the gory details of it, but for example, one of the first things I built in is figuring out the hours for people instead of just saying, well, I want you to do 15 hours this week. And what I looked at is, what's the max hours that each particular athlete will do? And then what is their typical week? And then I have these formulas to say, okay, I want this to be a bigger week. And then it says for this athlete, a bigger week is this many hours.
Percentage over that.
Right.
Yeah,
and,
that average.
if I want a typical week for this athlete, it's this range. So I built in all those formulas to calculate that. So that's just one example.
Yeah. Well, to follow up with Devin's question here, since both you and Julie are saying that Excel is a relatively powerful tool if you want to go that route, do either of you have basic tips for somebody out there? Either they're building it for themselves or they're a coach and they are wanting to move beyond what Training Peaks offers or whatever the case may be. What are the basic tips that you would offer to somebody as they build this annual training plan in a spreadsheet program? Julie, I'll start with you.
I think for me, again, I prefer to keep it more on the simple side. Like I said, I just, I don't really put in the formulas. And the reason for that is that I find most of my athletes are so unique in terms of their time availability, for example. So it's hard for me to have these set percentages in terms of time per week. And for me, again, I just really rely on a more simple format, more color coded, and that seems to work well for me.
Sounds like you got some company there in the room, Julie.
I do, in fact.
Trevor, do you have any basic tips that you would offer somebody without giving away too many of your secrets?
I guess my feeling is if you are an athlete who's wanting to take care of their own training plan, or you're new to coaching, I would say don't try to build something from scratch. I think there's a lot of good systems out there. Well, they might not have all the exact bells and whistles you're looking for. They're based on good training science. And to me, that's the most important thing. And they're going to help you make sure you build an effective training plan. So if you've never built one before, I'm going to say if you're using Training Peaks, whatever software you're using, use their yearly training plan system, and you're probably going to end up more successful than going, I can build this from scratch. And I say that as somebody who very early in my cycling career, I've already told my story on the show about my dramatic overtraining that took me off the bike for a year. Part of that was because I tried to build my own training plan when I had no idea how to build a training plan at the time, and it was just not wise.
Sure.
So I would say if you're fairly new, use the tools out there. If you are a coach and you've had a couple years experience coaching and you say, this tool that I've been using doesn't give me what I need, that's when you can start thinking about, maybe I should build my own system, build an Excel sheet where I can get exactly what I need to communicate the way I want to my athletes. But I don't think you necessarily need to go there right away.
Right. Great. All right. Well, let's move on to another question here. This one is having to do with the stress of racing. It comes from John Ingram. He's over in Dublin, Ireland. He writes, I'm new to road racing. I love it, but my love of racing is matched only by my hatred of pre-race nerves, he writes. The stress, the anxiety, sometimes to the point of nausea, takes away from the experience. What do I do to make it go away so I can enjoy this sport even more? Julie, let's start with you. What would you say for John here?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this one. I think first, we need to recognize stress really does come with the territory, and that stress is not necessarily a totally negative thing. That, we do have this certain threshold of stress that allows us to operate and perform at an optimal level. But I also think we need to understand we can get better at managing it. And I think a lot of times we forget that mental side of sport, and we put tons of training in the physical side, but yet we kind of disregard the mental side of it. And to me, that management takes as much practice and consistent training as the physical. So I think it's something, again, not necessarily totally a negative thing, and also something with more practice, we get better at. I also think if we can change our perspective on racing, that, it's not necessarily this place where we're just proving ourselves, but it's a place where we can actually thrive, and because of our fellow competitors, become better, and we can learn and push ourselves and reach new highs that we couldn't do on our own. So kind of flipping the perspective on it as just, again, something that's this really heavy, pressure-filled proving ground, to a place where, it's an opportunity to learn and improve, and kind of changing that feeling of it's something I have to do to something I get to do. And I think that can really help change the perspective. Then kind of just evaluating why are you feeling this pressure? What is it, or the stress, I guess I should say. What is it that's generating that stress, and kind of understanding that, and also just kind of reminding yourself of why you're doing it. Why is it meaningful for you versus, is it something for other people, or is it for you? So I think those are a few things that I would start with. And then, I think with racing, it's every race is going to be different, but the more experience you gain, the more you know what to expect. And then that helps alleviate the stress as well.
Trevor, before you dive into your answer specifically to John's question, I wonder if I'll ask a broader question. Maybe it's a kind of a dumb question, but not everybody's built the same. Why would John have such a reaction to racing, whereas somebody else, maybe same age, new to the sport, has a completely different reaction to the stresses of racing? Doesn't get sick, but just is this is amazing, I love this. Is that just the nature of his personality? Is there anything underlying there that you can help explain why people react differently?
I think that's a really good question. And the only thing that really just comes to mind immediately is everybody is wired differently. And some people they react quite strongly to stress. Other people it takes a lot more to stress them, or they have actually a more positive reaction to stress. Don't really think I have, without diving a ton into sports psychology or bringing in an expert sports psychologist, have much of an answer for you. Julie, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I think it's exactly what you said, just we all perceive stimulus differently. We can all, like Chris and I can perceive a stimulus totally differently. And so my stress level to it might be greater because I see it as something kind of like negative and threatening. And Chris is just like, oh, that's no big deal. And so it's how we're interpreting the stimulus, I think is then what's generating that stress or not. So I think that's a big part of, why people experience that same stimulus in different ways.
I think the important thing is you can train how you react and respond to that stress and to that stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'll give you my own personal example. My first year racing, I was a stress case.
Mm-hmm.
Like I knew the night before every race, I was not sleeping at all because I'd be so stressed.
Right.
And that culminated my first year racing. I went with some people to a stage race. And of course, I was the Cat 4, so they put me on a cot.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a 3-day stage race, and I had 3 days of not sleeping at all. So by the time I got to that final stage, I was a wreck.
Yeah, I bet.
From the stress. So I ended up working with a sports psychologist who wrote, I still feel, one of the best books on sports psychology I've ever read. It's unfortunately not in print anymore. So when discovered that it was never going to be printed again, bought 5 copies of it and hand those out to my athletes and always ask for them back.
Like a little library you are,
Right.
Trevor.
But it was in that book, he really talked about, Julie, exactly what you said, which is there's actually an optimal level of activation. So there's such a thing as essentially being understressed, where you're not going to perform at your best. And it is a big bell-shaped curve, and there's an optimal point of stress and activation where you're going to perform your best. And then if you go too far, you end up like I was, where you weren't sleeping and you're a wreck. So he worked with me on how to get to that optimal level. And there's a lot of different techniques that you can use. So he had a whole chapter in there about relaxation and breathing techniques. Those didn't work for me. That works for other people. So you should try all these. The one that actually worked for me was self-talk, where instead of trying to prevent myself from being stressed, I would try to get excited about the stress. So when I started feeling that stress, I go, great, bring it on.
Mm-hmm,
Keep telling myself, I love this stress. And over a year or two, I convinced myself of that. And even to this day, I go to a race, I start feeling that stress. I'm like, ooh, I miss that. It actually feels good as opposed to something that I dread.
Yeah, and we've done several workshops, videos on Fast Talk Labs with Grant Holicky on managing stress, what you just talked about, self-talk, examples of how to use that, when to use that, and other things. So those are great videos that can supplement to the answers to this question here today.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it kind of like goes back to what we said that, I think we perceive stress as this real negative. And when it comes to sport, it isn't a negative. It's just that healthy threshold, and that, we really do have the opportunity to get better at managing stress. Again, it's not something we're just subject to. I think we really need to remember, just like the physical, it really does take consistent practice, consistent training. And we need to continue to, we need to maximize our training sessions for that. And to your point, Trevor, the self-talk, developing that self-talk and hard training sessions and interval sessions and fast-paced group rides, and using all those opportunities to keep honing that ability. And I do think those fast-paced group rides are a great way to keep working through these nerves, and because it is more that unpredictability of the racing, and simulating that I think, again, the more you kind of know what to expect, the more you know you can work through these things, that develops confidence and reduces that stress. And I also really appreciate and agree with what you said, Trevor, about like, in some ways, I think this is what draws us to sport as athletes. It's kind of like that stress makes us feel alive. And there was a great quote from Billie Jean King that says, pressure is privilege, and pressure, kind of creates that sense of stress, but it does in some ways make you feel alive as an athlete.
In John's case, it seems like it's making him feel a little too alive. So he has some homework. He has some homework to do. He has to work on this. There's practice involved in finding the right amount of stress, not too much and not too little, the Goldilocks amount of stress, if you will.
Yep. And I also think, having within a race, going in with a game plan and having those kind of mini goals within the race, it helps you have a focus as opposed to just like, what's going to happen, and kind of being, at the mercy of the race, kind of just having a game plan for yourself, whether that's, working on positioning near the front, or working on mindset and that positive self-talk, or, saying, hey, I'm going to try a flyer. Having those different goals really helps provide that focus.
The last thing I'm going to add is this is an undervalued skill that all pros have to learn, or you never become a pro, of managing that stress and being okay with that stress and that fear. For example, when I was going up from Cat 4 to Cat 1, I had a training buddy who was a phenomenally talented cyclist. And he got up to the Cat 2 level, went to Green Mountain Stage Race and did the 1-2 race, which back then they didn't have Pro 1s. That was basically the pro race. It was the last race he ever did, because even though he was more than strong enough to be there, he was so scared of that peloton. He was at the back the whole race and just said, I will never do this again, because the fear got overwhelming. And yeah, when you're in that fast field where everybody's really aggressive and you're bumping shoulders, that stress, that fear can get overwhelming. And it's something that all athletes, as they develop, particularly cyclists, because this is a dangerous sport, you have to learn to address one way or the other. And I do remember seeing a very interesting study where they looked at how do professional cyclists deal with the fear of crashing. And so they did interviews with these athletes. And what was interesting and unexpected in the study was when they had asked these professionals, do you think you're going to crash? And they go, oh, yeah, no, I'm going to crash. Do you think it's going to be bad? And like, I'll probably end up in the hospital. And they'll go, does this bother you? And they go, no, it's just part of the sport.
Yeah, I think that's worth mentioning. In someone like John's case, these nerves, this anxiety, this stress is actually taken away from his enjoyment at this point. If he never moves past that, probably worth considering moving beyond cycling as a sport of choice for him. If he's got a good engine as an endurance athlete and he wants to put it to good use and have more fun, maybe he just has to find a different sport. I mean, that's an extreme example. You would hope that somebody could work through those fears, but you've just mentioned this friend of yours that basically said, I don't want to do this. It's not fun for me. Maybe he took that engine and applied it somewhere else, or, that's an option too.
In his case, he was a high-level collegiate swimmer, then got into cycling, had that experience, and my understanding is he then went back to swimming because...
Yeah, take all that aerobic engine and throw it into the pool, and there's far less danger in terms of crashing in a pool.
Well, if you crash in a pool, you've got bigger issues.
Oops, there's the wall. I forgot to turn. Yes. Hey listeners, we're pleased to announce the release of our 8th pathway. Our newest pathway is focused on exercise in the cold. Just in time for the chill of winter exercise, members of Fast Talk Labs can explore the best ways to train in cold weather and how colder temps affect our performance. The Exercise in the Cold pathway features Dr. Stephen Chung, one of the world's leading environmental physiologists, as well as Dr. Inigo San Milan, our Canadian CEO and coach Trevor Connor, and Dr. Andy Pruitt. Winter training isn't as simple as just adding another layer. Follow our Exercise in the Cold pathway to learn more. Let's move on to our next question here. It has to do with body image, an interesting subject, very interesting subject. This question comes from Amanda Newell in Providence, Rhode Island, and she writes, as a sprinter, it helps for me to put on muscle weight. Commitment to this discipline often means I'm surrendering to the fact that buying jeans will be more challenging than not. How can I better accept the beauty and strength and performance versus one that is defined more by the traditional image of beauty and femininity as skinny and less muscular? Julia, I'm going to start with you here.
Well, personally, I think Amanda needs to figure out what's important for her. Is it more important to pursue excellence and challenge herself on the bike or fit into a certain size jeans? And I think also just kind of like thinking about, of those two things, what's contributing to value in her life, like on a daily basis. And, I think, figuring out like which one delivers more meaning to her life, which one is more fulfilling, might help put it in perspective.
Trevor, what are your thoughts here? Don't give me that look.
It's a hard one for me to answer because
yeah, I understand.
It's a little bit different. When I can't fit in my jeans, I'm excited. But I agree with Julie. It's what is your priorities, and is the traditional perspective of beauty what's most important to you? And I think of, there was a woman I used to train with who, she was a phenomenal sprinter, won Canadian nationals in the sprint, like her first or second year as a cyclist. And she had a build that if you looked at the traditional perspective on beauty, that was not it.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't ever bother her because that build made her a great cyclist.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty complex subject to dive into. There's a lot you could offer that way outside of sport here. Gets into a lot of things. I'll ask a bit of a follow-up question. For example, say this person here, Amanda, says, well, I want both. Can she strike that balance, Julie? In your opinion, in your experience, both from your own career, athletes you've worked with, can people have it both ways?
I guess for me, like in my career, like I was so focused on kind of doing whatever it took to be the best I could be on the bike. Like I really didn't care about all the other stuff. I mean, and I think your body kind of, it morphs, and so maybe there is an opportunity for her to try to see if, like, maybe with a little bit less muscular gain, like maybe she can still maintain that high level of performance on the bike. I think she would just have to try to experiment with some different training approaches to see, like, okay, if she did a little bit more endurance and a little bit less like time in the gym, could she still maintain that high level? But again, for me personally, like I really wanted to like throw all my focus and energy into being the best I could be on the bike, and really didn't care about, kind of let the chips fall in all other aspects, and wasn't really, so I didn't honestly ever think about like image.
Mm-hmm.
I think going with that, if image is a concern, give some serious thought to what is your definition of beauty, and maybe you need to redefine that a little bit. I think back when I was doing my master's, when I was taking my health classes, and this is going to sound horribly unpolitically correct, but we used to talk about skinny obese people, which was people that were skinny, but they didn't eat well, they weren't healthy, and they had all the metabolic characteristics of somebody who was obese with all the health issues that went with that. And I can tell you, for me personally, if you ask me what's my definition of beauty, it's not necessarily skinny. It's healthy. And to me, somebody that's healthy and fit, that is quite beautiful. It's not how skinny can you be and how tight a pair of jeans can you fit into.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that would be my recommendation is, maybe you need to do that redefinition and not necessarily see skinny as the definition of beautiful, but see healthy and fit as the definition of beautiful.
I agree. Like for me, just again, personally, like it's more important. And even still, like it's more important how I feel versus how I look. And I think just having like sport and having, again, that opportunity for challenge and that pursuit of excellence, like that to me is more lasting and more pertinent in my life than how I look.
Right. Which is the being healthy.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Very good.
Okay, so I'm going to spring this on both of you. We've never done this on a Q&A episode, but I actually got hit with a question yesterday on the forum, which I replied to and thought it was really interesting. I gave my response, my feeling, but Julie, as a very experienced coach, I'm really interested in seeing where you land on this one. So I'm going to read this and spring it on both of you, including Chris.
Very good. Ready?
Okay, so this comes from, and I'm using his handle because I don't actually know his real name, but it's just Gerard on our forum. And he writes, "We know Trevor is a fan of 5 by 5 minute intervals for base training, which is a nice compact session and appears to be very effective. 2 by 20 minutes is commonly talked about / prescribed in plans by other coaches, and I've seen it being done anywhere from sweet spot to above threshold." So he puts in brackets 90 to 105% FTP ranges. So what do and don't you like about 2 by 20 minutes versus Trevor's 5 by 5 minutes?
Why don't you explain to those who are unfamiliar with your 5x5s what you mean by that?
So, yeah, and I think this is a response to, we just put up a video explaining how to do these 5 by 5 minute intervals, which I love. So the prescription is, I have my athletes do it right, same range. So it's around 95 to 105% of FTP if you want to do it by power, though I actually focus more on feel and heart rate. So what I tell my athletes is, let's say their threshold heart rate is 172 beats per minute. They're not allowed to exceed 173.
So these are right around threshold, not VO2 max.
These are not, when people hear 5 by 5 minutes, they often think VO2 max.
Right.
These are not VO2 max. These are not 120%. So this is threshold, maybe a little above threshold. So it's 5 intervals, 1 minute recovery in between. So you don't get a long recovery. And the research I've read on these basically says you get the quality, if not a little better quality, than doing a 25-minute time trial, because that 1 minute recovery just allows you to sustain the power and potentially even do it a little higher power than you could do 25 minutes just straight across.
Right.
So there's a lot of research on them showing a lot of great gains, but I've certainly gotten feedback from people that they go and do them and go, that workout was only 70 TSS. That's an appetizer. That's not a real workout. And I think that's part of what he's getting at with the question is 2 by 20 minutes, you're getting 40 minutes at quality versus 25 minutes at quality. And I think he's struggling with the 5 by 5 minutes right around threshold. It just doesn't feel like enough.
Well, I'm going to let Julie speak up first and answer this question, how she thinks they would compare.
So I guess my feeling, listening to this question is like, for me in my training, like I always have a variety of lengths of the intervals and terrain. And for me, like I'm still like a big fan in sub-threshold work because I feel like it is still getting those same adaptations with less stress. And I was listening to a podcast it was a physiologist from AIS, and he was talking about like they're now focusing attention on too much time at threshold could be detrimental to mitochondria. And I thought that was really interesting. And so for me, like again, kind of going back to this idea of sub-threshold, I feel like we can still get the same adaptations with less stress. So like listening to Trevor's, 5 by 5s, I think like for me, like that it makes sense, like to get that higher quality, and perhaps you do those more at a pure threshold type intensity. And perhaps then you do like 2 by 20s at sub threshold. But for me, like I'm always thinking about the athlete and not necessarily just the pure physiologic adaptation, but like demands of the event. And so like using intervals, not necessarily just for that narrow physiologic like objective, but thinking, cadence, thinking like mental demands of the event. So, I do think there's value in having people do those longer like efforts just mentally to be able to push themselves through it. So like if they're doing Leadville and they're having to do like these, big 6 mile plus climbs, like mentally to get used to that. But then I also think, like the shorter efforts, like those higher intensity efforts, but shorter, higher quality are also valuable. And for me, in my training, I tend to do like kind of a mix of like subthreshold to threshold intervals on flats, and maybe the flat intervals are shorter durations, and then climbs longer durations. But again, it's as much for like the mental aspect as the physical aspect, as, you know, like the mechanical cadence aspect of it. So I guess when I'm developing intervals, I'm not thinking of just one factor.
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, I would say the 5x5s serve their purpose and the 2x20s serve a different purpose. They're not mutually exclusive. They could both be worked into a training plan effectively. But I would say in terms of the execution, it's going to be harder in some ways to have a high quality execution on a 20-minute interval. It's a longer period of time where you're focused and concentrating on that target wattage, whatever that might be. So that has pros and cons. If you did this every week, perhaps that's mentally taxing, and at some point, you know, you lose the benefits of it to some degree. However, like Julia has said, there's a mental component to any interval session, I would say, that can be applied to races. So if you're leading into a race with at least a 20-minute climb, or maybe it's an hour-long climb, who knows, but that 2x20 session could be very valuable in helping you wrap your head around what that effort feels like, staying consistent if that's what you need to be on a long grind of a climb. So, like I said, I think each of them has its own benefits. The 5x5s, I would venture to say that they're going to be something you can work into the training plan more often. They're more of a digestible, it's not a snack, but it's with that 1 minute rest in there, you can reset more often, figure out what you need to do next time if you kind of did the previous interval poorly or not ideally, and you work on it over and over again. There you have more chances to improve. The 2x20s are just a little bit more challenging, and you don't get as many opportunities to perfect them. How did you answer this question, Trevor?
I mean, basically, both of you just covered a lot of what I had in my response. And Julia, I think you've completely added to it. I think you had some really good points. And yes, it is slightly different energy systems. It is different purposes. And I think they both have some great value. The direction I went in, and I'm going to give a longer response than what I typed. So I just want to give a little bit of my philosophy here. There's this great study that I read many, many years ago that it's a strength training study, but I still love it. And I've seen similar research done in endurance exercise, looking at intervals like this. But the strength training study, they had 3 groups. They were all doing the same exercises. But one group, when they got in the weight room, they would only do 1 set of the exercise. Second group would do 3 sets. Third group would do 6 sets. And then I think they had them do this for 6 weeks, a couple times a week. Maybe it was 3 times a week. I can't remember the exact details. And then looked at their strength gains at the end of this intervention period. And what you saw was the group that did 1 set saw 80% of the strength gains that the group that did 3 sets experienced. And the group that did 3 sets and the group that did 6 sets, no significant difference. So it's this law of diminishing returns, where you can keep doing more work, but at some point you're not getting any gains out of it, but it's going to fatigue you and wear you down. And so I've always taken that approach with intervals, which is I don't think intervals are about absolutely beating you up, doing as much as you can until you have to crawl home. So yeah, you're going to produce a much bigger TSS with the 2x20s than you're going to do with the 5x5s. But my argument is, at least to the extent that they target the same energy system, the gains are going to be pretty darn close. But when you then look at it in the context of a full week, you do the 2x20s, if you actually execute those with sufficient quality, that beats you up. It's going to be a few days before you're going to be able to do any sort of quality on the bike again. Where you do the 5x5s, you can do quality in the next day. So when you look at it in the context of the whole week, the 5x5s are going to allow you to have a higher quality entire week. And I think the overall training, as strange as it sounds, is going to be better. That's always been my philosophy. So my issue with giving the 2x20s is always you're doing a lot of beating yourself up for not a lot of extra gain, and it's going to require more recovery. That said, I think both of you had a great point, and I remember Ryan and I worked with an athlete who was a contender for winning the Nationals time trial, and we gave him through the winter the 5x5s and got his threshold power up higher than it had ever been, but he struggled with sustainability. He struggled with holding that power for 40K. So I do think, I agree, there is a value. What I usually do with my athletes is I have an extended period of the 5x5s, and then I give them 3x16s. 2x20s is fine as well, but it's use the 5x5s to raise the power and then use those longer intervals to learn how to sustain the power.
So these can be used in tandem in a training plan to make significant gains that one couldn't do by itself.
Right.
Yeah, very good.
And I don't know if you guys are interested, but Ryan just replied to this. Do we want to hear Ryan's reply?
Wow, that's really putting him on the spot. Make sure you point out any typos that he might have included in his response.
Absolutely. So this is new to all of us. I'm looking at this page and I just saw this come up. So we are doing a live answering of a question.
Wow, very good.
So here we go. Ryan. Oh, I like how he starts. Totally agree with Trevor. Get done.
There you go.
No, he wrote, totally agree with Trevor's first point, which is it's difficult to do the 2x20s with quality. I saw this every year in my indoor cycling classes. We would work up to a 2x20 workout once or twice a season. That's about it. And it was inevitable that the riders who were unwilling to reduce their FTP to levels that I recommended based on previous performance ended up not making the entire 20 minutes. So we would spend time spot reducing their FTP on the fly as they were doing those intervals. They would always end up at a sub-threshold power by the end because they were pushing too hard early on and weren't actually prepared to ride at what they had set for their FTP. So my take on those is that if you're going to do them, start easier than you think you need to. It's not worth being a hero and trying to ride them at 100% FTP the first time. If you make it 1 or 2 workouts at 90% FTP and complete them with good form, a steady cadence, etc., then that's a huge success. Build from there. But avoid the trap of going all in on the first session and having to reduce power throughout or building too large of a training load that requires a large recovery repayment afterwards.
Yeah, very well said, I think. Anything else to add to that, Trevor?
Nope.
No? Very good. Well, Julie, it's been a pleasure to have you back on the program. It's been too long. Thanks for joining us today.
I appreciate it.
Julie, always a pleasure having you on the show.
Yeah, thanks. You guys always enjoy chatting with you guys and, just brainstorming on these subjects.
Perfect. That was another episode of Fast Talk. Subscribe to Fast Talk wherever you prefer to find your favorite podcasts, and be sure to leave us a rating and a review. The thoughts and opinions expressed on Fast Talk are those of the individual. As always, we love your feedback. Join the conversation at forums.fasttalklabs.com to discuss each and every episode. Become a member of Fast Talk Laboratories at fasttalklabs.com/join and become a part of our education and coaching community. For Julie Young and Trevor Connor, I'm Chris Case. Thanks for listening.